Hey everybody, thank you for watching Leaf by Leaf. This is what I am going to call a raw book review. And by that I mean that I haven't really taken a lot of time to sit back and gather my thoughts about this book and look at my annotations and marginalia and reference different scholarly material and reviews and so on and order them. Instead, I feel compelled to just go ahead and get some thoughts out there. We're talking about The Great Gatsby, F. Scott Fitzgerald, as if I even needed to give the name. This massively popular book eluded me the first time I read it back in 2012. So 7 years ago, it's much later in life, admittedly. I never had to grapple with this novel. And now here 7 years later, I just finished Haruki Murakami's Norwegian Wood. The video will be coming out here in a few weeks. But that book, Norwegian Wood, owes a lot to The Great Gatsby. So it really stirred my interest to go back and read it here 7 years later. I'd kind of discarded it in my library here, somewhat forgotten. So this time I decided to read Maureen Corrigan's hagiography of the book and its author. Maureen Corrigan, of course, is the NPR book reviewer. I really like her stuff, and I saw that she had this. Actually, I think Stephen Moore brought this book to my attention in his collection of book reviews and essays called My Back Pages. If we look at what Maureen Corrigan says, now we have to put this in perspective because she loves The Great Gatsby as much as I love Moby Dick. Here are some of the attributes she gives The Great Gatsby. Powerhouse poetic style. It nails who we want to be as Americans. It is our greatest American novel. This book manages to say something big about America and be beautifully written. And we'll see that Corrigan more than a few times goes on about the beautiful language. Here is quite a claim. Every line, every page of the work in question is just about perfect. Every line, incredible language. The most beautiful sentences ever written about America. The language of the novel is buoyant. Now, she does add in this little statistic, and she links the Baz Luhrmann film of 2013 to the spike in paperback sales. However, I think that's a little bit of a thin correlation because we can't tell how many of those paperbacks were actually read. And if they were, was it a positive reading experience? And just as an example, almost every single Game of Thrones fan that I talk to, they say that they have the first book or maybe even the whole set of books, and they're always meaning to get around to reading them. It's really the HBO series that they love so much, and it compelled them to at least own the books. Here's an interesting claim. It's the only one of its canonical peers, Moby Dick, Huckleberry Finn, To Kill a Mockingbird, Invisible Man, Beloved, that foregrounds class instead of race. Fitzgerald always wants to want. It's Fitzgerald's thin but durable urge to affirm that finally makes Gatsby worthy of being our great American novel. And so this is just, to me, that's just the classic romantic longing that always keeps the object of its desire just out of reach, as we get in Walker Percy's novel that could be a contender, The Moviegoer. I would also like to cite Miss Lonely Hearts, The Recognitions, and even John Williams' Stoner. But anyway, let's talk about my experience of the book this time. Yes, it captures an era, though that really doesn't seem like the main point of the book. In fact, it's not. And, you know, there are parties and people coming in and out, just like a lot of novels of its time, a lot of transient figures who just want to party and, you know, casual affairs, unhappy marriages, salon life, champagne-infused soirees, and so on. But again, these are just touched on here and there. And really all they do is serve to contrast Gatsby's aloofness from all of that, his distractedness, because his eyes our own Daisy. And the very first tableau we see of Gatsby is a powerful tableau, although I feel like professors and scholars have harped on the symbolism of green lights so much that I do have to agree with Maureen Corrigan when she says, listen, it's not about the green lights, it's about the fact that it represents Gatsby reaching out to Daisy. The green lights are coming from her dock, and he has built this house right across, very deliberately. You've got these two triangles going on here where you've got Tom and Daisy Buchanan who are married. You've got Wilson, Mr. Wilson and Evelyn Wilson who are married. And then you've got Jay Gatsby over here. Jay Gatsby and Daisy end up carrying on an affair. Tom and Evelyn are carrying on an affair. And then you've got Nick Carraway, who serves as this, basically this reporter, this John Dos Passos-like character who is just somewhat objective for a while and actually pretty skeptical of Gatsby, unlike everyone else, enamored by this mystique that they've mostly assigned to him. But then in the end, you know, it's revealed to us as much as to Nick, this past, this Mad Men's Don Draper-like past of Gatsby's that causes us to finally empathize with him or sympathize with him. We start to see that Gatsby has done everything he can in his life to impress Daisy. Apparently there was a split over, at least in Gatsby's eyes, the schism between the two of them, besides him being sent off to war and then to Oxford and Daisy not being able to wait long enough, there was also the false pretenses on Gatsby's part of having enough money to take care of her. And so we can see psychologically how this plays into every single thing he's done when he finally gets Daisy over to Nick's house and then to his own palatial domicile. We see him, you know, there's no end to his trying to bring things to Daisy's attention and rate her reaction. I like how Nick sets himself up. His reserving of judgment on people has made him a magnet for those with secrets and griefs and stories. This perfectly presages what's going to take place and why Nick is the best person to report these events. Here are the characteristics we're given about Gatsby. Something gorgeous about him. Heightened sensitivity to the promises of life. Extraordinary gift for hope and romantic readiness. Gatsby actually serves as a mirror of our ideal self. I do like some of these lines that Fitzgerald adds in here. That most limited of all specialists, the well-rounded man. This is, to me, that's talking about the jack of all trades, master of none. And he says, life is much more successfully looked at from a single window, after all. And so that is an argument in favor of the specialist. But really, it gets us to think, which is better? Is it better to specialize and be an expert in one thing, or to know a little about a lot of things? I've struggled with this all of my life. We get some Freudian symbolism in here. I like this. 20 miles from the city, a pair of enormous eggs, identical in contour and separated only by a courtesy bay, jut out into the most domesticated body of salt water in the Western Hemisphere. Here's an interesting utterance that gives us some early insight into Daisy. When she has a girl, she says, I'm glad it's a girl and I hope she'll be a fool. That's the best thing a girl can be in this world. A beautiful little fool. Fitzgerald does beautifully set up some images of the time, especially domestic abuse that was accepted between men and women. This really, Buchanan could have struck me and broke my nose with the way I reacted to this. It says, making a short, deft movement, Tom Buchanan broke her nose with his open hand. And right on the heels of this bloody scene of him striking Daisy, then Mr. McKee turned to Nick Carraway and says, come to lunch someday. I mean, it's like you can picture this guy seeing a husband break his wife's nose, blood go everywhere, and then he turns to Nick and says, "Hey, come to lunch with me someday." It's unthinkable. And then right on the heels of that, we get the most bizarre, the most utterly bizarre cut and scene. It begins with an ellipsis, which is interesting. And it says, "I was standing by his bed, and he was sitting up between the sheets, clad in his underwear, with a great portfolio in his hands. Then I was lying half asleep in the cold lower," blah, blah, blah. We cut straight from Nick and Mr. McKee on the elevator to this little scene. Now, why is this thrown in here? The most obvious to us these days, for us who have been completely imbued by gender and sexual politics and literary criticism, it's easy for, as Maureen Corrigan says, for our gaydar to go off. I don't know, it strikes me as deeper than that, and I have a question mark here beside it, because this is one of the things I need to think more about. This is so bizarrely written and placed in the context of the rest of the novel. The novel then continues to amp up the mystique of Gatsby. These people have ascribed all manner of intrigue to him. Maybe he's killed a man, all these types of things. Despite all the glam and distraction going on these days, with all the parties and all the people thronging New York City and so on, Nick Carraway gives us this line: "I felt a haunting loneliness sometimes, and I felt it in others. There's still a void, there's still a longing and emptiness." And then he goes on to say, "Most affectations conceal something eventually, even though they don't in the beginning." And for sure, we see this happen with both Daisy and Gatsby, among others. More Gatsby mystique. He's a bootlegger. He killed a man. He's a nephew to von Hindenburg, and he's a cousin to the devil. Now, interestingly, we find that Gatsby has been reaching towards Daisy. Gatsby bought that house so that Daisy would be just across the bay. But we pretty much know this by now. And one thing that I think really irks me about this novel is that it tells us everything instead of just showing us things. And I've always found that to be a little insulting to the reader when every single thing is described. And so much so to where we have an abundance of adverbs to describe the way people say things, instead of just letting the dialogue and the body language speak for itself. Or sometimes it's completely superfluous because we well know by now the nuances that are happening. Nonetheless, there is a part in here where it says, "He came alive to me, delivered suddenly from the womb of his purposeless splendor." And I like that because the womb links up to the symbol of the egg, an egg being a type of womb. And now we find that he keeps throwing parties in hopes that Daisy will show up. I love this statement on Americans. Americans, while occasionally willing to be serfs, have always been obstinate about being peasantry. Here's another beautiful line. This is talking about Daisy's voice. "That voice was a deathless song." I love that. Here's a particularly beautiful passage, and it gives me that same feeling as a similar beautiful passage from Murakami's Norwegian Wood. By the way, it does feel a little odd linking Murakami's book to The Great Gatsby, but really, that's a standout book in the Murakami oeuvre. If you go and read it, you'll see what I mean. It's totally different, immersed in realism, and has real feeling. Anyway, I'm going to read this passage even though it's going to make this video a little bit longer. "One autumn night, 5 years before, they had been walking down the street when the leaves were falling, and they came to a place where there were no trees and the sidewalk was white with moonlight. They stopped here and turned toward each other. Now it was a cool night with that mysterious excitement in which comes at the two changes of the year. The quiet lights in the houses were humming out into the darkness, and there was a stir and bustle among the stars. Out of the corner of his eye, Gatsby saw that the blocks of the sidewalks really formed a ladder and mounted to a secret place above the trees. He could climb to it if he climbed alone. And once there, he could suck on the pap of life, gulp down the incomparable milk of wonder. Again, egg, the two eggs jutting out, perhaps playing into the symbolism there. His heart beat faster and faster as Daisy's white face came up to his own. He knew that when he kissed this girl and forever wed his unutterable visions to her perishable breath, his mind would never romp around again like the mind of God. So he waited, listening for a moment longer to the tuning fork that had been struck upon a star. Then he kissed her. At his lips' touch, she blossomed for him like a flower, and the incarnation was complete. Through all he said, even through his appalling sentimentality, I, Nick, was reminded of something, an elusive rhythm, a fragment of lost words that I had heard somewhere a long time ago. For a moment, a phrase tried to take shape in my mouth, and my lips parted like a dumb man's, as though there was more struggling upon them than a wisp of startled air. But they made no sound, and what I had almost remembered was uncommunicable forever. Again, that is a standout and beautiful passage. Now here's another curious detail that links back to the pair of eggs and sucking on the pap of life and so on. When Evelyn, after she has been struck by the car, there's a really curious detail that Fitzgerald adds in here. It's very grotesque. They saw that her left breast was swinging loose like a flap, and there was no need to listen for the heart beneath. All night the saxophones wailed the hopeless comment of the Beale Street Blues, while 100 pairs of golden and silver slippers shuffled the shining dust. Now, that right there does give me a sense of what Corrigan's talking about with the lyrical or poetic prose. Though, again, I take umbrage to every line. These are placed sporadically, in my opinion. Toward the end of Gatsby's life, he looks at Nick and he says, "Look here, old sport, you've got to get somebody for me. You've got to try hard. I can't go through this alone." But go through this alone, he does. And this is really a resounding nail in the coffin that did give me pause. Because here we see this love story, and we see all of Gatsby's romantic gilding of Daisy, and the fact that she never loved Tom. All of it comes shattering right in his face, and there's no closure between Daisy and Gatsby. The last he sees is her light go out in her house, and then this unfortunate and very Greek tragedy-esque ending occurs. Let me take a step outside again of wrapping this thing up and just offer this nice little quip by Nick. He says, "I'm 30. I'm 5 years too old to lie to myself and call it honor." I love that. The green light does operate as a sort of go signal, meaning don't brake, don't slow down, but go. The romantic's object, like I said, is always just beyond grasp. And we see here in the end, Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgastic future that year by year recedes before us. It eluded us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster, stretch out our arms farther. Gatsby is a figure who romantically believes that he can change the past, and that he's basically immortal, and has this future that constantly recedes. The horizon keeps going. I'm thinking now the Tennyson poem Ulysses, where he talks about something every arch wherethrough represents another horizon constantly moving out. That's not the words, but it's the same sentiment. Again, that was also captured very beautifully in Walker Percy's The Moviegoer. Those are all my notes and thoughts on The Great Gatsby. I'm still, although I definitely got more out of this time, I still want to reserve my judgments on it that I'll put that I would be okay with putting my name to until I've given this a third close reading and read some other scholarly resources and finished Corrigan's well-written book. So I hope you guys got something out of this. Let me know what you think of The Great Gatsby. This is really a thorn in my side right now. And as always, thank you for watching.